Pick your quarterback and pick him now. Joey Aguilar, Jake
Mhm.
Merklinger, George MacIntyre. Some Tennessee fans have already decided on their preferred quarterback, but why so soon? And based on what? Welcome to the Volunteer State. I'm Tennessee beat writer Adam Sparks, along with John Adams of the Knoxville News Sentinel. On this episode, we're going to explore the strange phenomenon of fans showing loyalty, support for a particular quarterback over other contenders for the job, all on the same team. It's a fun topic as we head into preseason practice here soon. And on that note, you may have noticed the pod was offline for a little while. Back on now, we should be having one pod at least per week from this point forward. Took a little bit of a summer hiatus, but we're back and ready to go strong as preseason camp gets closer here. So, John, to jump into this topic, I want to take you back to 1994 to a Tennessee quarterback competition. You're going to remember well because you're someone who covered it. But instead, I want to tell this from the perspective of a 14-year-old kid growing up in West Tennessee who thought he knew which Tennessee quarterback was the right guy for the job at the time back in 1994. And that quarterback was not Peyton Manning. That quarterback was Brandon Stewart. John, and I did this because I want to kind of understand the Tennessee fans' perspective of why they're choosing a guy, Team Merck, Team Aguilar, or Team GMAC already when we've seen so little or almost none of any of them yet. So, John, I went back to look at the box scores in 1994 early in that season, and I even watched earlier today. I watched a little bit of the Florida game because I mean that's more than 30 years ago. But I was trying to figure out why it was. I thought Brandon Stewart should have been Tennessee's quarterback and not Peyton Manning. Like what would tell me of what I was looking at that was the case, so I can empathize with some of these Tennessee fans. So I did that, and for people that don't remember, Jerry Colquitt was the starter going into that year. Got hurt 7 plays into the season. Todd Helton was a quarterback for a little while. He got banged up, went to baseball. So then we were left with Peyton Manning, Brandon Stewart. So I looked back at that Florida game, and Stewart had the better numbers. Now, that was a Florida game that year was the third game of the season. Tennessee got blown out 31-0 by number 1 Florida in Neyland. It's a pretty frustrating performance. Stewart was 6 of 8, mostly in garbage time. This is like third, fourth quarter. Stewart was 6 of 8 for 85 yards. Peyton was 3 for 5 for 27 yards. Stewart also had a couple of throws that sort of were like deep crosses down the middle, sort of told you that, hey, this guy can really get the offense going down the field. So based on numbers, I would suspect that's why I thought, well, this Stewart guy looks better than Manning. Reason number 2, he looked more like Heath Shuler. Now, this is coming out of the Shuler era. Shuler was a runner and a thrower. They even mentioned on the broadcast back in 94 that Tennessee fans, this guy's going to remind you more of Heath Shuler, Brandon Stewart, that is, than Peyton Manning. So I probably saw that as a 14-year-old kid and said, well, Shuler is the type of guy that you need to run this offense. There's a lesson in there for anybody looking for the second coming of Hendon Hooker, I would say, but we'll get to that in a second. In that game, Brandon Stewart ran the option a couple times. Obviously, Peyton couldn't do that. Stewart even broke off a 30-yard scramble, which said, hey, this guy's a playmaker. This is a dual threat guy, not like the Manning kid. And third reason, I think I probably thought Brandon Stewart was the best quarterback, despite seeing almost none of him, was I was a 14-year-old contrarian. While some zigged, I zagged. And, a lot of people were telling me, adults at that time were telling me, Peyton Manning is the guy, because this is Archie Manning's son. I mean, he's Archie Manning's son. He's got to be the guy. And to a 14-year-old kid in 1994, telling me that he's Archie Manning's son was like telling a kid today that, well, this is Tim Couch's son. This is Eric Zier's son. This is the son of a really good former SEC quarterback that I had seen very little of, but only heard the name of. So for those reasons, I thought Brandon Stewart for a very short time was better than Peyton Manning. I was completely wrong. John, I tell that story to set up our current situation where some Tennessee fans have already picked out their guy they think should be the starter. John, why do fans feel such allegiance to a particular quarterback when they've seen so little of them?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with that tells us how important the quarterback position is. You can't really pick sides with a coach.
Hmm,
You got your coach. There's nobody else. It's not as though you're going to promote the offensive coordinator to coach in the second game if the offense is dismal in the season opener. So, and does anybody care if this, if you think the second team right guard, offensive guard is really the best player? Nobody notices because you'd have to study the video to really make a educated guess. Quarterback is such a high profile position. That's part of it. I also think there's kind of an inherent thing with fans who want to believe maybe they've seen something. They they saw something that nobody else saw. Even the
absolutely.
even the media, even the coaches. I kind of like that guy. And and I think the nature of sports too plays into it. We see somebody make a play. In any game, in any sport, we say, wow, what a play. It's just one play, but we're so dazzled by that one play that we want to say, man, this guy's going to be something special. And I've seen that with players and been right that they were special, and also been wrong where they weren't that special. But I think that kind of stuff all plays into it. And going back to the Manning Stewart thing, which I was covering in 1994, uh, it's not as though anybody thought of Brandon Stewart as being this incredible underdog. He was highly sought after, Stevensville, Texas, superstar quarterback in at the highest level, Texas football, high school football. So, but Peyton, that name, everybody knows. Everybody's a Manning. I mean, everybody's got reason to be optimistic on genes alone. And that proved to be the right assessment. So, yeah, it's kind of easy to go for the second guy. Like the majority favor this guy, so I'm going to like this guy, and I'm going to build a case for him.
I
And
like, I like that, John. That fans want to see something that nobody else has seen,
mm,
right? More than the coach, more than the media. This conversation sort of stems from reactions to our coverage over the past few days. Coming out of SEC media days, everybody, including KnoxNews, had stories on Joey Aguilar. Now he hasn't talked to the media yet. He's going to do that at UT's media day on July 29th, so next week. But a lot of the stories were about Josh Heupel and players talking about how how Joey Aguilar had won them over with some things that he did over the summer. How he's built relationships and those, so on and so forth. And so all the media that cover UT all wrote stories about these things about Joey Aguilar, and the responses that I got on you know, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, my inbox, a lot of people in person that I know around Knoxville was sort of a frustration. Oh, you guys have already crowned a starter. The competition hadn't even started yet, and you guys have already named a starter. Now, I pointed all these people to the actual text of the stories, which clearly laid out this is a three-man competition. It's a legit competition. It's actually open. I had a story recently where I laid out the scenarios where all three of these guys could win the job. I had quotes from Josh Heupel and all these stories that said it's an open competition. I had a headline on one of the stories that said Joey Aguilar won over his teammates. Now he's got to win the job. So, but people sometimes, I think, confuse attention with recognition. Um, the reason that Joey Aguilar, there's so much Joey Aguilar stuff right now because he's new. That means he's newsworthy. When Jake Merklinger first got here, there were stories about the new quarterback, Jake Merklinger, and we had stories in spring practice that year when he committed spring practice that, could he win the number 2 job? When George MacIntyre got here in December, we had stories about him. When he was in spring practice, we had stories about him. The new guy is newsworthy. It's just what it is. And so there are a lot of Aguilar stories. There will be more Aguilar stories when he talks to the media for the first time, and then we'll get more into the competition. But a lot of people reacted to some of that attention that Aguilar was getting as if he was being named the starter, where I didn't. Nothing that I wrote said that, and I actually didn't see that elsewhere. So you got a lot of the. I got like some Team Merklinger, Team Merk that came out and said, Merklinger's been in the system. I don't know why you're crowning this Aguilar guy. I saw him on film, and he wasn't even that good at App State. I had some that in Team GMAC, Team MacIntyre, that came out and said he's the better prospect because I saw him in the spring game. That was usually what people would say. I saw him in the spring game against backups and threes, and he was great. And so you sort of have those divisions already in the fan base. Granted, a lot are saying, like, I don't care who wins the job, just the best guy that wins the job. But some people got pretty frustrated that their guy was not getting top billing. And John, I just think that's interesting that people pick out a quarterback based on so little.
I think part of it also you can attribute to the immense interest there is in college football in the Southeast. And we're right now, people start talking about the season to come after the last game of the previous season is over, mercifully in Tennessee's case against Ohio State. So they're always looking ahead. Well, you go through spring ball, you go through the summer, all this just keeps building, mulling over, picking apart everything, every position. So, we still got another month, more than a month to go. So people want football to be here. So it's not here so they can at least talk about it. And I think that quarterbacks are always a popular target. But again, I laughed when you said the spring game because I learned many years ago to forget everything I ever saw in a spring game. It just doesn't matter. And it's more apt to mislead you than really inform you. It just doesn't matter. You can't. And you mentioned when you mentioned that Brandon Stewart playing well against Florida in 1994, the game was already decided.
Right.
When he came in, he said, "Okay, Florida led that game 31-0 at halftime. That was the final score. That had all the potential to be the worst defeat in Tennessee history, but Steve Spurrier pulled out the starters early, didn't run his offense, just kind of killed time for a half. And so the idea that it was kind of like for Brandon Stewart, kind of like a spring game performance because Florida was down to its the lowest echelon of his depth chart when Brandon Stewart made those plays. So yeah, it'll be nice when the next few weeks pass by and we won't have to. Fans can talk about something else, and they'll soon be able to see a game and actually, report and think about what happened.
And Steve Spurrier, if he was anything, he was merciful. That's for sure.
No, that's not. That's not a word that comes to mind with him. In fact,
Yeah.
it never has. You can ask some of those teams early in his career at Florida, like Kentucky and LSU, some schools that didn't hire him when he interviewed for a job. But no, but on that night against Tennessee, a really good Florida team and a struggling Tennessee team with issues at that point and some injuries, it could have been overwhelming. And he really was kind of merciful on that night. Didn't happen often, but it did on that night.
Yeah, back to UT's competition. I think most of the fan base, you know, gun to their head, so to speak, would say Aguilar's probably going to be the starter. I mean, they did bring him here to as a solution to their problem. Um, but you didn't hear from those much in the past week because Aguilar was getting so much of the attention. They didn't really need to jump on a bandwagon. It was already there. But I think the just subtle backlash to that narrative that he's going to win the job, I think comes from, and John, you may have said it earlier in this episode, or maybe to me off the air today. I can't remember which one our conversations have blended. But I remember you telling me it's easy to pick Aguilar, and that's not what fans want to do. You don't want to pick the obvious guy, right? I mean, because you're not really that smart if you're picking the obvious guy, right?
Yeah, you're more cerebral, more astute. You see something that these other clowns didn't see, who they overlooked this, and you know why this guy is going to be the quarterback. But it's and the other thing that contributes to that, you can watch any player in one play and see a play that, wow, that guy, what a play. Any athlete can make that one play. And so that can help you if you've decided this is my guy and this is the guy I'm going to believe in, this is the guy I'm going to pull for to win the job, and this is the guy that's going to make me look smarter than everybody else, then you start finding evidence that contributes to that narrative. Well, you
Sure.
saw that 6-yard run he made when he should have been caught behind the line. You look for things to back up what you believe.
Yeah, it's proof texting, right? Whatever I'm looking for, I will find.
Uh-huh.
If you're on Team Merklinger, I think you're looking to, you're arguing that he's been in the system for a full year, and Josh Heupel, it's all about his system. So then Merklinger should have the lead because he's been in the system the longest. You could also, if you're looking for what you're talking about, you could go back to not this spring game, but the spring game before, his first one, a little over a year ago, when Merklinger had a couple of runs. I remember he ran for like a 30-yard touchdown or something. Now, granted, they weren't allowed to hit him. But you saw some athleticism. And he said, "Hey, this guy, he can run and he can throw." And so maybe you lean that way. I think also for the contrarian fan, Merklinger is their guy. And I've talked with some this week about that. I was like, why do you like Merklinger? And a lot of what comes out is, you're just handing the job to Aguilar. Aguilar hasn't earned it. He's a transfer. Merklinger came here and, grew into the system and worked hard. And they so that's the contrarian, that everybody assumes it's Aguilar. So I'm going to go with Merklinger. The ones that pick out MacIntyre, they haven't seen him play at all. I mean, Merklinger threw like 9 passes last year. So there's nothing you saw in games, actual games, that would sell you a Merklinger necessarily. MacIntyre, there's a couple things with him. I don't think that's as much contrarian. I think he's an in-state kid. He does have some name recognition. I mean, back to the original analogy, I mean, he doesn't have Manning name recognition. But MacIntyre's name is known. His uncle, George MacIntyre Sr., was a longtime college coach. He was Vandy's head coach, but he was coach at a lot of other places as well. His uncle, Mike MacIntyre, has been a head coach at 3 or 4 different schools. Colorado, especially, is the one that jumps out. But so the MacIntyre name, there is a pedigree there, and he's an in-state kid. and he's the the newest toy, so to speak, at least of the recruits. And so if you want MacIntyre to be the guy, and you're convinced that MacIntyre is the guy, you look back at this last spring game when he outperformed Merklinger. Now, were they playing the same competition? Sometimes they were, sometimes they weren't. But John, you said earlier, like spring games can give you sort of a false sense of something. If you had asked me, and maybe we said it on the pod at the time, I can't remember, but if you had asked me which quarterback looks the best and sort of size them up going into the spring game, I would have told you that Merklinger was growing well in the system and he was coming along slowly but steadily. He had shown improvement. They liked where he was at. He was throwing the ball well. They had worked on his mechanics, so his accuracy had gotten pretty good. And he just had more of a comfort in the system. That was going into the spring game. In the spring game, he looked a little lost. He was slow delivering the ball. He took some sacks. He just didn't. He looked like the new guy in the system, not the older guy in the system. If you had asked me about MacIntyre before the spring game, I would have said he's a developmental guy. He's probably going to redshirt. And he's a little erratic with the ball at times, and they're going to need to work on his fundamentals. Because of what I had seen in practice, MacIntyre would sail the ball high, he would throw it short. Just in just throwing against air, just to wide receivers, he would miss guys. And then you get into the spring game, and he threw the ball pretty well with accuracy. He looked comfortable. His timing was good about when to tuck it and run. He looked more athletic than I think we had seen to that point. So the narratives of what I thought of those two quarterbacks in the first 14 practices flipped in the spring game. And the spring game is what fans saw, at least the fans that came in person. So I think it goes back to the point that you said, John. If he's your guy, you're going to find reasons to support your original premise.
Well, I also think you mentioned about how you viewed these quarterbacks before the spring game. Sometimes, based on what you've seen, you form an opinion. Might not be a hard, fast opinion, but it's somewhat of an opinion. You develop an image of a player. Well, when he goes out and performs at a level that's better than that image, I think there's a tendency to overreact a little bit like, whoa, I guess I was wrong about this guy. This guy's a lot better than I thought he was. Well, maybe so, maybe not. But I think when you can't help but have an image of somebody based on what you've seen. And anytime that image seemingly is surpassed, there's a tendency to overcorrect your assessment, I think.
Yeah, and
Am I overthinking that?
No. I think overthinking is maybe more of what we should do. I think the underthinking at times gets us into these messes. And we're talking about fans. I'm also talking about media too, where you think a guy is the guy and they ends up being a different guy. There's so much more to that position also, especially in this Heupel offense that we can't necessarily see, and sometimes we don't know. This just popped in my head of back to the spring game again. Anybody coming away with that said MacIntyre played better than Merklinger, and I've talked about why that would seem to be the case. But I was in the press box during the spring game, and so sort of behind the curtain here, usually during regular season games, the stadium is loud enough and there's broadcasts going on in different rooms that when you're in the main area of the press box where the writers sit, you can't hear much of what's going on with coaches that are a couple of booths away from you. But in a spring game, there's virtually nobody else up in the box up there. It's just a handful of media members and maybe one radio team or one TV team, and then you've got coaches. So you can actually hear the coaches yelling into their headsets down to other coaches and players if they're loud enough. And this is just anecdotal. I'm not saying this is the full picture, But I didn't hear the voices of offensive staff, whether it be the offensive coordinator um, Joey Halsley or anybody else. I didn't hear their voices much raised when Merklinger was on the field. But when MacIntyre was out there on the field, pre-snap, you would hear some complaints, some criticisms. George, snap the ball. Snap the ball. George, why isn't he snapping the ball? Yeah. Or when it would appear he would be changing the play. No, George, don't get out of that. Just stay with that. Why is he changing the play? And you would hear, and then, by the way, and then the play would go on, and he would throw like a 6-yard pass complete, and you'd say, okay, that play was fine. But apparently something was there where he was supposed to recognize something and run the ball, or he was supposed to recognize something in protection that he did not. And so there are things I think that show up in film that are mistakes that usually inexperienced players are going to make that the coaches know about that we don't know about because we don't know the play call, we don't know the protections or any of that sort of things. Those things we found out on down the line that Hendon Hooker excelled at. What run play to get into or out of, how to change up protections, where the ball should go, and that's why they were so efficient, how quickly or how slowly the offense should go. Those are things maybe that Jake Merklinger is a little better at least coming out of spring, than George MacIntyre, which would make sense. He's a year ahead. Maybe those are ways that he could carve out a little bit of an edge over Joey Aguilar, who's just now coming into the system. And so I say all that to say some of these things about this job are just, are just hidden that we're going to have to read between the lines, which is always the case with this. You're always listening to coaches about what they're not saying or the hints that they're dropping, about getting us into the right play, or, needs to work on his fundamentals, needs to be quicker with the ball, needs to know where the ball's going, needs to ID safeties better, these sort of things, that I'm sure we'll have fun with during camp when we hear these.
In 2010, for the spring game, Derek Dooley was the coach, and he decided it would be a good idea to have celebrity coaches, token coaches for the most part. So Jimmy Himes and I were the coaches of the two teams. I think I was with the orange team. I may have been the white. I don't really remember. But anyway, Jim Chaney, who was the offensive coordinator at the time, he essentially was the real coach. I was there on the sideline. But I just stuck with Jim Chaney the whole time. And the two quarterbacks, my quarterback was Matt Sims. Remember Matt Sims?
Sure, yeah.
Hung around the NFL for a while. Tyler Bray was the other quarterback. He was a freshman, had a big arm, hung around the NFL. Both guys ended up hanging around the big NFL, though you couldn't really have told it by that spring game. But anyway, I remember Jim Chaney had just told Matt Sims about a play. And a couple of plays later, the play developed, and Sims went away from it. He was supposed to be looking to his right. That was a design play. Who was the right wide receiver? I forgot his name. Gerald something. Anyway, so he ended up, instead of throwing this short route to the right, he ended up throwing downfield to the left side of the field. Jim Chaney just turns around like, what? What did I just say? He was just totally exasperated, and that certainly makes an impression. And then later, our offense went nowhere. We didn't score a point, I don't think. But Tyler Bray made a pass later in that spring game. Chaney just turned to me and said, "Who do you think should be the quarterback?" After Bray had made a pretty good pass, but that was in the heat of the battle. And, a lot of things are said that really aren't that meaningful, although by the end of the year, Tyler Bray was a quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, and this is to prepare fans, I think, some for when UT's media day and camp gets kicked off again. That'll be next week. Is that this competition will take care of itself. and it may stretch into the season. I mean, we talked before the Joe Milton Hendon Hooker competition. You thought was settled, and then it wasn't, and then it actually flipped the other way around. So we'll see. We'll see. I'm curious to see it. But media day, Joey Aguilar, we'll hear from him for the first time. I will probably spend most of my UT media day just camped out beside him and try to get to know him and get a little feel for Joey Aguilar. But then Merklinger and MacIntyre are going to have their chance both speaking. They'll both be at media day. They'll get plenty of coverage, and they'll most importantly get plenty of opportunities to win the job. John, fall camp, preseason practice, it starts up also next week, and I wanted to just run down a few guys that I'll be looking at. So much of the attention is going to be on quarterbacks, but there are other guys I think that I sort of call them thumbs up, thumbs down guys. That you can tell maybe about a week into camp or so, or at least when their position coaches talk to the media, which happens usually early to middle of camp. Thumbs up, thumbs down guys. Two guys that popped into my head are Star Thomas, running back from Duke, Amari Jefferson, as an Alabama transfer. These are both guys that were here in the spring, that had not carved out a role by the end of spring, and sort of, this is the time to do it in camp. And I think by the end of the camp, you're probably going to have a thumbs up as them as contributors, or a thumbs down. And this is a critical time for them. Now, I mean, other transfers and new players have come in, and some of them weren't even here in spring. I mean, the cornerback Colton Hood from Colorado, he's got a prime opportunity to play and maybe even compete to start. We can go through a whole lot of other new guys or new-ish guys, but Star Thomas and Amari Jefferson are the two guys that popped into my head, because Star Thomas right now comes into a running back room that has two guys coming back in Peyton Lewis and Deshaun Bishop, who we know can play. They were backups last year to Dylan Sampson. But this Tennessee has used a duo at times and a trio at others, and they can kind of go either direction. Their current running backs coach seems like he is like a duo. The previous running backs coach liked more of a trio. But when you have Dylan Sampson, it's Dylan and whoever else. You don't go too deep into the rotation. Star Thomas is a guy that produced at Duke and at New Mexico. Yeah, New Mexico before that. Or maybe it's New Mexico State. Anyway, he's produced. He's a veteran. He's been around college football a long time. He's an all-purpose guy, can run it, can catch it, but was a little lost early in spring trying to figure out the tempo of things and the playbook and all that. Now that he's gone through summer, I want to see if he's going to make this into a trio, or if he's just one of those guys that gets sort of dropped to the side and phased out. And that happens sometimes at running back. We'll get to Jefferson in a minute, but John, Star Thomas, I mean, do you feel like that's a guy who kind of comes on in camp and gives him something, or is he just a guy that we forget about a couple months into the season?
Well, I saw him some at Duke last year. Thought he was a pretty good running back, productive player, certainly capable of contributing. I wonder if he misread the room, though. He sees Dylan Sampson leaving Tennessee, SEC Offensive Player of the Year. Looks like a vacancy there at running back. Good. Deshaun Bishop, backup, was a walk-on. And then Peyton Lewis, a young guy. But those guys have potential, and they've played enough to prove themselves. And if you look at Heupel's offense, usually two guys, at least two, sometimes three, do play well. I wonder if Star Thomas really thought maybe if he goes to Tennessee, he could be the guy as opposed to being in a three-man rotation. And then he gets into a system that's different than what he was in. I kind of wonder if he's had second thoughts about, was this the right transfer destination?
Well, as far as like reading the room, I'm pretty sure I know what the sales pitch was for Tennessee,
Right.
and yeah, and it probably went something like this: "Hey, we always play two, sometimes three guys. They all get their chance." Dylan Sampson was the number 3, and now he's SEC Player of the Year. Jabari Small at times was the number 3 guy, yet he was the starter over Jalen Wright. So you can kind of, hey, if you're a guy that wants to be guaranteed carries, look, we spread it out here. Also, we see you're an all-purpose guy. You catch the ball out of the backfield. Look, this is a wide open offense, and we want to throw the ball to running backs. We haven't yet, but that's the plan, and we need you to come here to be that guy. So I can see the sales pitch that would have brought him in, and it may come to fruition. But yeah, when he came in, Deshaun Bishop on paper was a walk-on. He's not anymore. He's a scholarship guy, and I would say I mean, it's a coin flip, but I would say if they played a game tomorrow, Deshaun Bishop is probably the starter. I think they trust him in the way that they trusted Jabari Small back in the day. Don't know if he's your best running back or not, but he knows the offense the best. He's the best pass protector. He's the guy that you trust with the ball. But Peyton Lewis is, they're 1A and 1B. They have some trust in Peyton Lewis too. So that's why he's a thumbs up, thumbs down guy to me, because I could see Star Thomas being right in the mix and even being their lead guy at times this year, especially if injuries hit the backfield, which they always do. I could also see him, it being a duo, him being phased out, and then one of those freshmen that are here now maybe jumping over him, because they only have him for one season. He wasn't even supposed to be eligible now, but his former teammate Diego Pavia got that rule changed, and so he got an additional year of eligibility. That's the only reason Star Thomas is still in college football. So the other guy I mentioned, Amari Jefferson, in-state guy, spent 1 year at Alabama, wide receiver, was injured at Alabama, so he never played a game. He redshirted last year, and he was still recovering from that injury. I think it was a hip injury back in the spring. So we saw him run routes. We saw him catch the ball, but he was I think a red jersey early in camp, early in spring, and then he was a yellow jersey, which is like different degrees of how much you can touch him or not touch him, or you certainly can't hit him. I mean, they have 7 scholarship wide receivers. 3 of them have played, and the other 4 have never played in a college game. Jefferson's one of those. He's a redshirt freshman, and then there's 3 true freshmen. So the door is wide open for anybody to play at wide receiver. But I think Jefferson is definitely a thumbs up, thumbs down guy. Like it could go either way in camp because, he's played no more than the freshman. And so, one of those freshmen, there's a couple of 4 stars in there, which is what Jefferson was. If he's not 100% healthy, one of those guys could leap over him and suddenly get the limelight, get the coach's attention. And Amari Jefferson could be a guy who kind of fades to the background, or he could be a guy that is ready to go 100% healthy and gives you a guy slot receiver who's right in the rotation. Are you as curious about Jefferson as I am, John?
Well, I'm curious about the entire receiving corps because it's a giant question mark, I think. But in his case, our short time, 4 years worth with Josh Heupel, has taught us that receivers don't always click right away in this offense. And again, I wonder how much Amari Jefferson researched that, if he got that deep into it when he was looking at a landing place from the transfer portal, because we saw it last year. We saw it the year before. It doesn't always happen right away. And then given a year or two, the players get better and show some of the talent they were expected to have. I'm not saying that he can't do that, because he's certainly got a great opportunity. As you said, it's a wide open area. You don't, and it's a much needed area. Tennessee needs playmakers out there. It doesn't just need somebody to be able to run the right routes, and catch the ball in traffic occasionally. It really needs playmakers.
It's funny that when I heard you say that about Josh Heupel's his track record with receivers not clicking immediately, it taking to year 2 or whatever. Jalen Hyatt is the obvious example of that, who went from playing very little to the Blitnikoff winner a year later. But I was thinking in the negative of that, the fact that they have 4 new guys at receiver, that it's going to take them some time. I guess there's also a positive spin on that, in that their 3 probably starting receivers are all second-year guys in this system. Chris Brazzell was solid at times last year, but they expected more out of him. Well, year 2, do they get it? Mike Matthews was a 5-star freshman. We saw flashes of him. Maybe in year 2, that's more of the consistent picture that he is a dominant playmaking receiver. Braylon Staley was a freshman last year, played very little, played in the bowl game, or I'm sorry, in the playoff game. But year 2, is he the guy at slot? I mean, he's going to have to be, because Squirrel White's gone. Braylon Staley's your slot receiver unless Jefferson or somebody else steps forward. So maybe there's a positive to that their 3 guys they're going to count on the most are all second-year guys in the system. But the negative of that is, you're probably going to have to find somebody else beyond those. By the way, another thumbs up, thumbs down guy for me that just popped into my head when we're talking about receivers is an athletic tight end who you will see split out, looking a little bit more as a receiver, is Ethan Davis, because this is sort of the time for him. They've relied on transfer tight ends to replenish that position the last 2 or 3 years. And Miles Kitselman is one of those, and he is back, and he's one of the better tight ends in the SEC. But they have to have another guy, and because of their low numbers at wide receiver, they have to have a guy at tight end that can catch the ball downfield. Ethan Davis is that guy, and he actually had a good rapport with Nico. Can he get that same rapport with Joey Aguilar, Merklinger, MacIntyre, whoever wins the job? The time is now for Ethan Davis. There's no doubt about that. That's a former really good recruit who's been in the system, who has the tools. There's opportunity there. They need him to be a downfield pass-catching tight end. And so that's another thumbs up, thumbs down guy that I think you'll probably hear a month into camp. Like when we get to the season, you sort of hear either really positive outlook for Ethan Davis from the coaches, or you'll hear some comments about, he needs to be more consistent or something, which is definitely not what you want to hear from him.
Or you might not hear anything at all.
Which is even worse.
That's even worse. Maybe you mentioned Ethan Davis had developed rapport with Nico. Do you think he considered jumping into the portal and flying west with the Amaleava?
I think he likes it here a lot. I also don't know what the market would be for him. Although I'm starting to shy away from that now. I used to say that when we talked about transfer portal, like, well, that guy doesn't have much film, so there's not much of a market. There's a market for everybody. And I think Ethan Davis caught a couple of touchdown passes last year. And back to our original point of the quarterbacks, if you're looking for something, you will find it. And if you're looking on film and seeing that one play where he showed all that ability, you could find it. But I mean, he needs to be the best friend of Aguilar, Merklinger, MacIntyre, whoever wins the job. And I do think that's a interesting thing in that the players are going to know who the starting quarterback is before we do, because usually they can tell and they can see it. And the guy who's leading the offense up and down the field in practice at the portions that are closed to the media, that's the guy that the players get tipped off pretty, maybe not all quickly, but they get tipped off sometime in camp who the guy is.
I think it struck me that as you're going down all these thumbs up, thumbs down guys, positions of uncertainty on offense. I haven't gone into a season covering Tennessee, not many seasons where there were so many questions about the offense.
Yep.
Not all of them in a negative vein. I mean, we really don't know who the lead running back could be because and that's because there's some proven depth there. It's not because it's a wasteland. There's some good guys, and we know that Heupel's offense has been very kind to running backs wherever he's been, not just at Tennessee. So we can look at that, and that could be a position of strength. Lack uncertainty at receiver. You bring up tight end. We hadn't even talked about the offensive line, but this will be a revamped offensive line in some ways, counting on a freshman perhaps to start at offensive tackle and David Sanders, a couple of transfers entering. I mean, there are questions in every area of this offense.
Yeah, it's funny is that, we'll probably do one of these when we get closer to the season about this is a popular question with fans about, hey, who do you think is going to lead the team in receiving yards or rushing touchdowns or whatever? I could make a case that any of the three projected starters at wide receiver will be their most productive receiver. And that's just a rare thing because Mike Matthews is probably the most talented, but Braylon Staley plays slot, and that's usually the more productive position in this offense. But Chris Brazzell's the experienced guy coming back. So who's their best receiver? One of those three, but I don't know. Who's their leading rusher? We've already said it could be either of those two guys. Star Thomas could slide in there and be the guy. Who's the starting quarterback? Well, one of three guys. We can rank them, but we don't know. It's going to be one of those three guys. And yeah, the idea of having four new starters on the offensive line and your fifth guy, the returning starter, Lance Hurd, carries pretty big question marks because he was inconsistent last year. You're going to have a true freshman starting in David Sanders up there. You probably have two transfers starting. This group has never played together. It's for fans. I think it makes them nervous going into a season like this. For reporters like myself that cover the team, I've been. I don't think I've been this excited about a season maybe during the Heupel era, just from the reporting angle of it, because first year was interesting because it was new, but you knew they were not going to be really good just because of where the roster was. Year two was fun, but maybe for different reasons. Year three, you knew they would take at least a part of a step back. Last season, it was all about Nico, and let's see if this is, if Nico is a Heisman guy or whatever. But there's a lot of fun to this because I think there are so many questions going into camp about all these positions and what's going to be the identity of this team and who's the quarterback going to be and how's the offense going to change. That's fun in terms of storylines. It's not as fun for fans who want to know something that they can count on. This offense, it's really hard to say for certain what you can count on. You can count on Miles Kitzelman catching a handful of touchdown passes in the red zone this year. You can count on this offense being productive because Josh Heupel's offense is always productive. On defense, you can count on the defensive line being somewhere between solid and good because Rodney Garner has produced that. They've recruited to that. Beyond that, I don't know what you can say is really certain. Again, that's fun to cover. It's maybe not as fun to project maybe out for fans.
Yeah, and another interesting thing to me about this season is, and I think we all were reminded of this last season. Don't make a real hard evaluation early on because we saw what happened last year when Tennessee came out of the gates just blazing in every area. I mean, against inferior opponents. And who fooled us the most was probably North Carolina State. NC State was supposed to be a pretty good team, like an 8-win team. Some people considered a, dark horse for the ACC championship even. It was awful. And it got better at the end of the year, but it was awful early on. And so that that runaway win, I thought, really raised expectations for fans. I think it raised them for me. I thought this looked like a dominant team, and part of that because I thought NC State was better than it was. So now I don't think we'll really know thumbs up, thumbs down, how these question marks. We won't really be able to answer them until you get to the Georgia game.
Yeah, don't make rash judgments, because if you do, you may think Brandon Stewart is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, and this Peyton Manning scrub needs to transfer elsewhere. I'll own that one more than 30 years later. We'll see what other rash judgments that we all make once camp starts. Camp starts next week for Tennessee. We'll have another pod then, either going into it or right after it starts. We'll see how those storylines roll out. Share this podcast with your fellow UT fans. We'd love to for you to subscribe as well to make sure that you never miss an episode. And thanks for listening to this edition of the Volunteer State.